This is Sal Rough Cuts LaSardo reporting in with this weekly edition of Rough Cuts. We're going to talk about two of the most very sensitive times in the history of pro wrestling that affected the WWE, WWF at that time frame. And I want everybody to know that these are my opinions. These are solely my opinions. This has nothing to do with OneWrestling.com or the WWE or Bill Apter. This is just my weekly video column. And we're going to talk about two of the most darkest moments in the history of sports entertainment in general as a whole, even though they affected the WWF, WWE at the time. It's being talked about a lot on Twitter, and I wanted to, for those that do not have Twitter or have not been able to see it on Twitter, I wanted to bring up these two incidents that did happen that is being talked about and offer my thoughts and takes on it because I grew up during that time frame when both of these incidents happened. The first incident that happened was back on December 28th, 1984, with a reporter by the name of John Stossel who got into an incident with Dr. D, David Schultz. I do got to remind you now, this reporter was asked to be able to talk and interview a wrestler about wrestling, about the world of professional wrestling. And Dr. D agreed to do this interview. Now you have to understand something. Dr. D, David Schultz, is a heel. He's a bad guy as a character, but no way reflects the person. But also, keep in mind, Dr. D. David Schultz is one of the toughest men alive. Dr. D came along during an era with the Stand Lariat Hansons, the Blackjack Mulligans, the Harley Races, the Terry Funks, Bruno Sammartinos, the tough, legitimate tough men. And Dr. D. David Schultz is a legitimately a tough man. And a man you would not want to make mad under any circumstances whatsoever. This is a guy that could flat out kick your ass. And he has, because if you know the backstory on Dr. D, he is a real life bounty hunter who has captured over 17,000 plus wanted fugitives by the law and has worked with the federal government and the FBI to bring criminals to justice. But he was also a professional wrestler. And at the time, at a backstage interview with John Stossel, they had an altercation between the two guys. And John Stossel came out to Dr. D and called pro wrestling a fake. That's what it was. Back in '84, right after Christmas, in an interview, and he called him. He said, "You guys, what you do is fake. It's fake." And the story was that Vince McMahon had told Dr. D to hit John Stossel. Whether or not Vince McMahon told Dr. D to hit Stossel is irrelevant at this point. It's irrelevant what Vince told Stossel, what Vince told Dr. D to do. Dr. D, David Schultz, came from an era of old school wrestling. And Dr. D, David Schultz, is going to protect the business. No matter what, Dr. D is going to protect the business. He is never going to allow anyone to call a profession that he loves dearly and takes very seriously fake. Never. There is nothing fake about what pro wrestling is and is about. There is nothing fake about it. I have been to the matches. Bill Apter has been my friend for over 30 years. I have studied wrestling my entire life, and I'm 50 years old. There is nothing fake about this business. These body slams are very real. When the body slams, when they hit their heads on the mat, it's real. When their backs hit the mat, it's real. The chair shots are real. The blood, the scars are very real. The slaps are real. Everything they do is real. Maybe the outcome is predetermined, but you don't go to see, okay, well, what's going to be the outcome? You go to see a story unfold. You go to see two wrestlers go in the ring and tell a story with a finish. And these men and women train and work 300 plus days a year to go out there and have one shot to perform in front of 20, 30,000 people, or even 500 people, depends where they're going. But they have one shot to walk through that curtain and leave a lasting impression on the audience, and hoping that the next time they come to town, that audience will then tell their family, their friends, whoever, to buy a ticket and come out and see this is the greatest thing ever. Dr. D. David Schultz was never going to allow anybody to call pro wrestling a fake. Never. Ever, ever, ever going to call him out on it. And I guarantee you, Bruno Sammartino, Stan Hansen, Blackjack Mulligan, Harley Race, Terry Funk, none of those guys would have ever allowed Stossel to get away with it either. So forget the fact that Vince told Schultz to hit him, because Dr. D didn't need Vince to tell him to pop him. Dr. D protected the business. He protected the industry and said, enough's enough. You are not going to call me a fake and a fraud. You've never stepped inside that square circle. You don't know how much my body aches. You don't know the bumps and bruises that I've taken. It's very real. And Stossel pushed David Schultz to the limit, and Dr. D protected the business and popped him. Whether or not Vince told him to do it or not, it's irrelevant. Dr. D did not need Vince to tell him to hit him. John Stoltz got what he deserved, plain and simple. Now, if Jim Cornette was there, I assure you Jim Cornette would have popped Stossel with a tennis racket. I'm sure of that. Or a Freddie Blassie, or a Johnny Valiant, or a Bobby Heenan would have protected him as well, because they're not gonna stand for it. Captain Lou would have done something as well, but it was the altercation between the two. And Dr. D had every right, because Dr. D protected the industry for every hardworking man and woman that has ever stepped foot inside that squared circle to this very day. You don't ever walk up to a wrestler and say it's fake when you've never stepped inside that squared circle. There is nothing fake about it. Tully Blanchard was interviewed and said specifically, you paid your money to come out here and see me perform and see us perform as performers. And we only get one shot to make it right. The bumps and the bruises, the aches and the pains, the blood, everything you see is very real. And he has to live with that every day, that pain every day. These wrestlers are in pain every day. If you see in these interviews and talk to these wrestlers that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even Bruno Sammartino before he died, and he was a workout fanatic, was still in pain for the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of matches that he wrestled. It takes its toll. That cage is very real when they risk their lives inside that steel cage. One false move, and you're talking career-ending, life-altering. And in many ways, it is life-altering, and yet they still perform. They are highly trained, skilled, athletic performers. There is nothing fake, and John Stossel did not know anything about the world of wrestling entertainment. John Stossel tried to make a name for himself because the WWF, WWE was on a rise. The other territories, the NWA was on the rise in '84. Wrestling was getting more mainstream, and John Stossel wanted to take it down, and he picked on the wrong man. As far as David Schultz is concerned, David Schultz had to face some backlash, and there were some legal things that went on with this that eventually was settled. It did affect him, but I'm sure if you asked Dr. D that day, until this day, I have never spoken to Dr. D. If you ask Mr. Schultz today how he felt about it, I would bet my bottom dollar that he doesn't regret doing what he did to Stossel. Dr. D is a very old school man, and he truly believes that he has to protect the integrity of the business like anybody else. Because if you don't protect it, then who is going to protect it? Then people are going to take you as a fraud, and wrestling is not where it is today. Professional wrestling and sports entertainment is one of the most lucrative businesses in the entire world. There are promotions galore. There are many men and women that are going to get trained. Of course, everybody wants to be in the WWE and wrestle at WrestleMania on the grandest stage of all in front of hundreds of thousands of people. But you still have other territories like AEW just coming up that's giving jobs to people. Impact TNA giving jobs to people. Ring of Honor, New Japan, the indie scene. They're not making maybe the kind of money as you would on the WWE level, but there's people that have spent their lives working so they can perform in front of a live crowd. because that's what they love. They love the business, and they're going to protect the integrity of the business. And Dr. D deserves a lot more credit than he should have ever gotten, because he never got the credit for protecting the business. And I'm sure his co-workers probably said something, thank you for protecting it, because he did. He protected it. He also went on, as I said, he became a bounty hunter. He became a bounty hunter. He worked with the FBI. He traveled all across this globe, and he brought over 17,000 fugitives to justice. He's an American hero. Dr. D. David Schultz is an American hero. Whether you people like it or not, you don't hear much about him, but he has brought all these bad guys and made our world a better place by bringing these criminals to justice. That says a lot about a man that went through such a terrible ordeal over an incident, over a guy who opened up his mouth and basically tried to slap wrestling in the face. And guess what? Stossel got slapped in the face for it. And Stossel paid the price. In the end, David Schultz had to pay a price for it too, but I know David Schultz came out on top of this because he became a very well-respected bounty hunter. And he has protected and served our country very well. And it's unfortunate that our government has not acknowledged and recognized the work that he has done by protecting us and giving us the safety and freedoms that we deserve, because Dr. D brought all these criminals to justice. And I applaud Dr. D. And I hope that, if Dr. D sees this, that he will applaud this video and, maybe reach out to me or reach out to my friend Bill Apter, because Bill does know him. And, understand that for me, growing up, even when I saw it, I applauded it because I knew there's nothing fake about what these men and women do. There's nothing fake about it at all. And Dr. D, I give you all the credit in the world. But what happened to Dr. D after the incident? Well, what happened was apparently Dr. D was fired by the WWE, WWF. That's not the case. He was not fired over this incident, okay? He was not fired, people, over this incident. What happened is that Mr. T was coming along. Mr. T was coming along. And what happened is that WrestleMania 1 was coming up. Mr. T was coming off movies, A-Team, Rocky, all this, and he was teaming with Hogan for the main event at WrestleMania 1, which I'm going to get into with the Richard Belzer incident in a few moments. But at that time, they got into an altercation. Dr. D and Mr. T got into it, and push came to shove, and Vince McMahon apparently saw money in Mr. T, obviously, because Hollywood, mainstream, WrestleMania 1, they let Dr. D go. They got into an altercation, or going to have an altercation. Something happened between the two, and Dr. D was let go. And Mr. T went on with Hogan to do WrestleMania 1. They capitalized on it, as you can see. And then Mr. T stuck around for another WrestleMania where he fought Piper in a boxing match. It was a total debacle. And that should have never happened. Maybe a wrestling match, but a boxing match should have never happened. But they capitalized on WrestleMania 1. And that was the whole thing. Dr. D paid a price. Yes, he did. He paid a price wrestling-wise, but he went on to bigger and better things, even though he had to face some backlash over it personally with it and with Stossel in general. But Stossel got what he deserved. Plain and simple. Stossel got what he deserved. Hands down. Dr. D became an American hero in my book because of what he did as a bounty hunter. Mr. T had his moment in the limelight with WrestleMania 1. Hogan went on to be a Hall of Famer and what have you with regardless of the incident. But WrestleMania took off. Dr. D is a very, very special individual for what he did. And I will tell you this. I've watched a lot of Hogan matches and many, many matches over the years since I was a kid. The best match that Hogan ever had was back, and I put this down. This was 6 months before the incident with John Stossel. June 17th, 1984, the Minneapolis Massacre is what it was known as. Dr. D took on Hulk Hogan in a championship match, just a regular match, for nearly 20 minutes. This was the best that I've ever seen Hulk Hogan ever look in a ring. You can watch the video online on dailymotion.com. It's in Japanese. It's completely uncensored. Dailymotion.com. You can search for it. It's in Japanese. No big deal. The match itself is uncut. Dr. D made Hulk Hogan look like $10 million in that match. That was the best match I have ever seen Hogan in. That was truly what I expected to see every time Hulk Hogan stepped in the ring. And we didn't. We didn't, obviously. Not all of Hogan's matches. Nothing ever came close to this match. This match brought out the best in Hulk Hogan because Dr. D brought out the very best in Hogan. By far, hands down, the very best. And this is my favorite match of Hulk Hogan's and my favorite match of Dr. D because Dr. D brought out the best, the very best in Hogan. If you haven't seen the match, you really should. So, Dr. D, sir, I know you had a situation back in '84, sir, but I thank you. I thank you for protecting the business, protecting the men and the women who have come along and have been able to want to define and go inside the squared circle. There is nothing fake about pro wrestling. In fact, Bill Apter wrote a book, Is Wrestling Fixed? I Didn't Know It Was Broken. Same analogy. There's nothing fixed because there's nothing broken about it. Unless you stepped inside that squared circle, believe me, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been at ringside. There's nothing fake about it. It's 100% real. The bumps and the bruises, everything I've talked about for the last 15 minutes is definitely very real. And the toll on these bodies and the toll it takes on their families is something no one can ever understand unless you've done it yourself. So I applaud you, Dr. D, and I hope at some point the government of the United States recognizes that you brought over 17,000 criminals to justice because you made sure justice was served because that's exactly what the doctor has ordered. So that's part one of Rough Cuts. The second I want to talk about is another incident that happened. And this was, looking on here, this was right before WrestleMania 1, March 27th, 1985. This was the Hulk Hogan Richard Belzer incident. Now, Richard Belzer is a comedian, an author, an actor. He had a talk show at the time, and they wanted to boost ratings. I remember wrestling is, mainstream. Now, remember, they're just coming off the incident back in December with the David Schultz incident. So promoting WrestleMania 1 would be very ideal. It would be extremely ideal to try to put that behind you and go forward with promoting WrestleMania main event Hogan and T against Piper and Orndorff. Well, there was no preparation for this. The backstory is that Hogan was going to put Belzer in a headlock, a little headlock, and just show a move. Well, it backfired completely. The video is online. You can look for it on YouTube. Hogan put Belzer in a sleeper type of hold. He had him, and Belzer was tapping him, telling him that he was losing feeling in his arms, and then Hogan released the hold, and Hogan fell, and Belzer fell down and hit his head on the floor, and he was out, and Hogan went over and slapped him. Okay, it's okay, get up. And then all of a sudden, Richard Belzer jumped up and said, "We'll be right back after we come to this commercial break." But when he turned around, you saw the blood was in the back of his head and on his clothes. And there was nothing fake about that, what had happened. When Hogan had him in that move, he wasn't supposed to squeeze as tightly as he did, but apparently he did. He did, obviously. And then when he released it, Belzer fell straight back, whipped on his neck, and hit the ground and busted his head open. Hogan was reckless with this whole incident. Okay, I've seen the footage, I've seen the interview. This was not Richard Belzer's fault. Richard Belzer did not provoke Hogan in any way, shape, or form. Hogan was careless and reckless. He could have done it very lightly, barely put a squeeze on it. You had kids in the audience. There were children in the audience because at the request of Mr. T wanted children in the audience. He could have just, very easily done it and then just released it, and Belzer could have got up and smiled. But instead, Hogan released it because when he released it and Belzer fell back, Belzer was out and hit his head, and there was blood running everywhere. Hogan was reckless and careless. Did Hogan mean to do it on purpose? I think Hogan was in character in the moment, but he should know better from being a professional wrestler to be more careful. They didn't rehearse this. Belzer said they never rehearsed this. It was just going to be a hold, and that was going to be it. The aftermath of it was, well, they went on to WrestleMania, and the rest was history with WrestleMania 1. Belzer eventually settled out of court years later, is what the interview with Roy Firestone that Richard Belzer had went on Roy Firestone and talked about it. They did settle out of court, but still the damage was done. He was not prepared for the extent of what was going to happen. It was just going to be a very simple thing. The whole Hogan, WWE, WWF, and the whole thing. Yeah, Bills had a right to go after and sue them, and eventually they did settle out of court, as I stated. But if Hogan, aka Terry Bollea, would have just taken responsibility from the moment and said, "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it the way I did it. I got caught up in the moment. I'll be more than happy to settle with this and work with Vince, and let's just get this resolved amicably. I didn't, all is well and good." But they didn't. They dragged Richard Belzer through this for many, many years. I understand, to protect the integrity of the business, there's nothing to protect. Your performer, your biggest name performer, made a mistake. An accident? Okay. But Hogan should know better. Richard Belzer is 150 pounds soaking wet. He is not a threat. He never called out the business. He never did anything wrong, did not do anything to provoke it. It was a move that gone wrong. And if Hogan and the WWF would have just accepted responsibility, even after WrestleMania, because this was a few days before WrestleMania, it wouldn't have tarnished what had happened as far as what the WWE, WWF has become. But they could have just said it was just an accident. It was a terrible mistake. We're very sorry. We didn't mean for it to happen like this. We'll take care of everything and take care of Mr. Belzer. It was a stunt gone wrong. No problem. Everybody would have understood that it was just a bad stunt that gone wrong. It wasn't meant to happen like this. And, we're sorry. And that's it. Richard Belzer is not a trained professional wrestler. He is an actor. He's a comedian. He's not anywhere near to know what this business is about. And Hogan should have known better. And I am on the side of Richard Belzer in this. And it's unfortunate that Richard Belzer has gone through what he had to go through with that. Everything worked out. Belzer, I've read online, he is fine. He's happy. He's doing very well for himself. Hogan, as you know, went on to a Hall of Fame career. But the point of doing these two things on Rough Cuts is these were two very dark moments in the history of the WWE, WWF, and in wrestling in general. And yet wrestling survived it. Wrestling survived it. The Stossel incident, yes, John Stossel got what he deserved. David Schultz didn't need to be told to protect the business. David Schultz would do it 100 times out of 100 times. Hogan was wrong with Richard Belzer 100 times out of 100 times. He was wrong in it. If he can go back and do it over again, I'm sure Hogan would probably regret it and handle the situation differently and better, knowing it, but he got caught up in the moment. That's fine. You got caught up in the moment, but it still happened. It should not have been dragged out through the legal system for the number of years it did. It should have just been laid to rest immediately and come out publicly. We were sorry, but they didn't. They dragged out. That's where I lost a lot of respect for what that incident was with Hogan and the WWE because of that incident. Yes, time heals all wounds, but still, Richard Belzer's life was changed forever because of it. Yes, he's gone on to great things and all, but it's the incident itself that stands out. The same way we're still talking about the John Stossel, David Schultz incident, we're still talking about it. But they're two totally different things. The first case with Schultz, the reporter was wrong. In this case, it was the wrestler, not the other way around with Stossel and Schultz. Schultz had every right to protect the business. If I'm David Schultz or anybody else, I'm knocking out John Stossel. I don't care what anybody tells me. I take the lawsuits every day of the week. I will protect my wrestling brothers and sisters and all those that give their lives to this business every single day of their lives. No doubt. With Hogan and Belzer, Hogan was wrong. You have to admit, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It was a stunt gone wrong. We should have prepared for it. That floor, there was no padding on the floor. And when Belzer's head hit the floor because he was out, you saw the blood running down. He got stitches. He was seriously injured. He's lucky he wasn't killed. Imagine if Belzer was seriously injured or potentially life-threatening, altered because of it in a way. Maybe he was disabled or he passed away. What it would have done to the World Wrestling Federation, WWE at the time, who knows? we may not have what we have today. So two very dark moments, two very different moments. One case the wrestler was right, the other case the wrestler wasn't right, but they're still being talked about today, and they have to be brought up to a light. Yes, these are men and women that give their lives 300 plus days a year. They train, they're away from their families, the bumps, the bruises, everything I've talked about for 25 plus minutes. Yes, it's very real and it's very serious. There is nothing fake about what they do. But even sometimes a performer can cross the line. It does happen. They are men and women. They're human beings just like you and I. You can catch them in an awkward moment. It's just the way it is. But mind you, back then, when you're trying to build the biggest, grandest stage of all, Hogan going on a talk show like that and doing that, wouldn't you want to be extra more careful? It worked out for the WWE because WrestleMania 1 is one of the biggest attractions. And look where we are almost 36 years later, excuse me. You have, WrestleMania as we know it. Some people may have forgotten about it. I haven't forgotten about it. We're talking about it on Twitter all the time now because it's the anniversary was in March and last December. But forever, keep in mind that people that these incidents will they have happened, but wrestling is still a very strong, vital entertainment facet that we need in our lives. And the men and women coming up today are giving their lives. We owe Dr. David Schultz for protecting the business. Yes, we do. We owe Dr. D. David Schultz a deep debt of gratitude for protecting the business the way he did. We shouldn't commend or crucify Hogan for an accident back in '84 and 2020. Yes, he made a mistake. It was an accident. They should have taken responsibility. What have you? Like I said, they should have taken it. But it's now 2020. There are times where you have to let it go. You have to let it go. It's over and done with. Hogan went on to be a Hall of Famer. Mr. T had a great, promising life. He went on with 18. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Great life. Richard Belzer is living a very happy life. He's done his thing. Dr. D went under the radar after all of it. You don't hear anything about him because wrestling was not really in his forte much after that. But he became a bounty hunter, a silent bounty hunter. And he did our country proud. And I'll tell you, go back and look at his matches. He brought out the best in every single performer, wrestler that he got in the ring with. He was never going to be a world heavyweight champion because there were people. You had Hogan at the top, the Intercontinental title. You had Tito Santana, Greg Valentine battling. You had the Honky Tonk Man come along years later, but you had Pedro Morales, Don Morocco, Snuka. You had guy. He was just a heel that went out there and his job was to make guys look good. He won his share of matches. He lost matches, but he went out there and made you look like $1,000,000. And incident or no incident, it wasn't a matter of him being a Hall of Fame wrestler. He did his job. And he did a greater job serving our country justice by putting away over, like I said, 17,000 fugitives on the run. And Hogan and Belzer, a scary, unfortunate incident, yes. But Hogan doesn't need to be crucified over it. And I know he's not in 2020. But it does get brought up. It was wrong. It's over. It's done with. Let's move on. Let's forgive and forget, and let's enjoy the rest of our lives with it. But let's not forget that it did happen, but let's not bury anybody going forward. So, for this edition of Rough Cuts, I just want to thank you very much for your time. Dr. D, sir, thank you for what you do for our country. Thank you for bringing the fugitives to justice because you're exactly what the doctor ordered. Don't let people like John Stossel ever tell you the business is fake because if anybody ever says that to your face, I know you're in your young 60s. I'm sure you'd slap them again, and I would be right there supporting you, my friend. And Hogan, well, you're a Hall of Famer. You went on to bigger and better things in life. We don't need to say any more about what Hulkamania is and what Hulkamania was and whatever forever will be and what WrestleMania became. They are two incidents that happen in the world of professional wrestling. They are dark incidents, but let's not forget. The sport of professional wrestling is alive and well, bigger and better than it ever will be. And we owe guys, the performers back from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, 90s, and so on, for making it what it is today. The single greatest entertainment product out there. For this edition of Rough Cuts, may all of your matches be a main event. Until next time, I'm Sal LaSardo reporting in from Claremont, Florida. Thank you. God bless.